What happens when an undercover CEO secretly steps into his own warehouse as a night shift worker and uncovers shocking abuses hidden beneath his company's success? Thomas Bennett, the powerful CEO of ElectroNation, disguises himself as an ordinary employee only to discover the harsh realities his staff endured daily: overwork, unfair treatment, and managers abusing their power. Join us as we reveal the hidden truth behind closed warehouse doors, witness Thomas's eye-opening journey, and find out how one undercover CEO transforms injustice into lasting positive change for his employees. Watch closely, this story will surprise you. Thomas Bennett was the charismatic CEO of ElectroNation, a booming electronics retail empire known for its impressive growth and sparkling showrooms across the country. Under his leadership, the company thrived financially, boasting record sales and steady profits. But beneath the impressive financial reports and flashy storefronts, Thomas had recently become troubled by an increase in disturbing complaints trickling up from warehouses. Complaints about mistreatment, poor working conditions, and relentless pressure from supervisors. Sitting behind his mahogany desk at headquarters, overlooking a city that glittered beautifully yet seemed distant and disconnected, Thomas felt unsettled. Profits were climbing, yet the voices of discontented employees whispered an entirely different story, one he couldn't ignore. He realized he needed to witness the realities of his company's operations firsthand, free from the polished reports of upper management. Determined and driven by genuine concern, Thomas made a bold decision: to trade his tailored suits and polished appearance for rugged jeans, a scruffy beard, and oversized glasses, and step anonymously onto the front lines. He chose a modest warehouse in a quiet rural town hundreds of miles from his central office, a place where his face wouldn't be recognized. On a chilly Monday evening, with apprehension and curiosity mingling in his chest, Thomas arrived for his first shift as a night shift packer, ready to experience the unseen side of ElectroNation. He was promptly introduced to Greg, the shift supervisor, whose cold eyes and harsh demeanor immediately set a troubling tone. Greg barely acknowledged him, only mumbling something dismissive about keeping up or getting out. Thomas swallowed his pride, nodded quietly, and stepped onto the warehouse floor. As boxes and machinery hummed around him, he met Anna, a seasoned warehouse packer with a wry smile and a weary look in her eyes. She sized up Thomas with good-natured humor, warning him about the tough night ahead. As he pulled on a pair of gloves, feeling the ache in his muscles already beginning from just anticipating the physical labor, Thomas realized he was stepping into a world vastly different from the comfortable corporate life he'd always known. A world of grueling work, overlooked dedication, and unspoken hardships. Tonight, he wouldn't just be observing from afar. He'd be fully immersed, experiencing the demanding realities of the employees who made his company's prosperity possible. Thomas's first night as an undercover warehouse worker started with a jarring welcome from Greg, the stern-faced shift supervisor, whose introduction was little more than a gruff grunt and a dismissive wave toward the production floor. Wearing simple glasses, a rough beard, and nondescript uniform, Thomas felt invisible, completely absorbed into his new role, exactly as intended. He was immediately paired with Anna, a seasoned warehouse packer, whose dry humor and tough resilience were evident in her every move. Anna, noticing Thomas's hesitation with amusement, tossed him a bright orange safety vest and joked that if he could survive the night without running away, he'd have already beaten half of the previous new hires. The warehouse buzzed with activity. Forklifts hummed, workers hustled back and forth, and overhead lights illuminated the massive storage racks, lined with countless boxes, each filled with products awaiting shipment. Anna quickly demonstrated the routine: pick, scan, pack, repeat, and Thomas struggled to keep pace, fumbling through boxes and paperwork while Anna moved effortlessly, expertly navigating shelves and stacks with practiced precision. He felt awkward, his muscles straining as he struggled with the repetitive, physically exhausting task of packing electronics into boxes, sealing them, and placing them onto an ever-moving conveyor belt. Anna worked swiftly, offering quiet encouragement, yet her own fatigue was evident in the strained movements of her shoulders and the brief moments when she'd pause to stretch her aching back. Between grueling hours of continuous physical labor, Thomas noticed something unsettling. Greg prowled the warehouse floor with a perpetual scowl, snapping sharply at anyone who dared slow down or appeared fatigued. At one point, Thomas accidentally dropped a package of small electronics, causing Greg to bark angrily from across the aisle, reminding him harshly that mistakes weren't tolerated. The fear in his co-worker's eyes spoke louder than words. This was clearly the norm. During their short break, Thomas rubbed his sore arms and glanced at Anna, noticing the way she leaned heavily against the break room wall, pressing her knuckles into her lower back. He gently asked about her obvious discomfort, prompting her to quietly admit that she'd been dealing with chronic pain due to constant overtime shifts without proper rest. Her voice dropped lower as she confessed that Greg deliberately kept their hours just below full-time thresholds to deny benefits. As Anna spoke, Thomas felt a growing anger mixed with guilt, realizing that these hard-working people were suffering silently, their struggles concealed behind tidy productivity reports and profit margins. By the time the whistle blew signaling the break was over, Thomas knew he wasn't just observing. He had stepped into a grim reality he could no longer ignore, one that called for immediate intervention and profound change. As the night dragged on, Thomas experienced firsthand the relentless demands that warehouse employees endured. Sweat soaked through his shirt, and every muscle screamed in protest as he moved heavy boxes filled with electronics from towering storage shelves to endless conveyor belts. Anna, despite her evident exhaustion, kept moving with remarkable efficiency, her practiced hands effortlessly sealing boxes even as pain shadowed her every movement. Each time Thomas glanced her way, he noticed her wincing subtly, rubbing her sore back or stretching briefly before continuing without complaint. Meanwhile, Greg stalked the aisles, his presence a looming shadow of tension over the entire crew. His barked orders were ruthless and degrading, criticizing employees openly and loudly for minor mistakes, and repeatedly reminding everyone that meeting productivity targets was all that mattered. Human comfort be damned. Thomas witnessed Greg berating Louis, a younger employee, for briefly pausing to wipe sweat from his face, sharply reminding him that there's no time to waste company money. Nearby, Denise, an older warehouse assistant, struggled to lift heavy boxes, visibly grimacing with each step, yet Greg showed no empathy, barking orders for her to move faster. Thomas clenched his fists, feeling anger rising in his chest. This was not the company he had envisioned. He silently documented every injustice, every humiliation he witnessed, determined that he would hold Greg accountable. The relentless pressure mounted as the night wore on, breaks becoming shorter, workloads heavier. Employees hurried silently from task to task, clearly afraid of catching Greg's attention. At one point, Thomas overheard Anna quietly reassure Louis, a younger employee, visibly shaken after a confrontation with Greg. "Just keep your head down," she whispered sadly, clearly frustrated at being unable to offer anything more than comfort. The longer Thomas worked, the clearer it became that these employees weren't just physically exhausted. They were emotionally drained, living under the constant threat of job loss, denied basic dignity, and forced to tolerate abuse to survive. As sweat dripped from his forehead and his muscles burned with fatigue, Thomas felt anger simmering beneath the surface. This wasn't the successful company he'd proudly built. This was a hidden world of exploitation, silently tolerated because employees felt they had no voice. By the end of the shift, Thomas's hands were raw, his back aching in sympathy with Anna and the others. He had seen enough to understand that the issue wasn't merely poor management or inefficiency, it was an unjust system, entrenched in his own company, perpetuated by supervisors like Greg, who cared only about hitting targets at any human cost. Thomas left the warehouse that morning, exhausted yet determined, knowing it was his responsibility not just to address these wrongs, but to fundamentally change the culture he'd unknowingly allowed to take root. During a brief, much-needed break in the dimly lit employee lounge, Thomas finally found a moment to gently probe deeper into Anna's struggles, driven by the unsettling realities he'd already witnessed. She sank onto a worn plastic chair, eyes closed, one hand pressing into the small of her back, clearly overwhelmed by the accumulated stress of the night's labor. Thomas carefully sat beside her, quietly asking if she was okay. Initially hesitant, Anna opened up slowly, as if cautiously testing whether she could trust him. Her voice was soft, tinged with bitterness and resignation as she explained how their supervisor, Greg, routinely slashed employees' hours without notice, forcing them into part-time schedules despite the heavy workload. "You know, he does it on purpose," Anna whispered, her voice tight with frustration. "He cuts our hours just enough so we're never officially full-time. We lose benefits that way. Healthcare, overtime pay. It's all just a game to him." Thomas's heart sank further when Anna disclosed she'd recently lost her company health insurance precisely because Greg had intentionally kept her hours below the eligibility threshold. Now, with chronic back pain, she had to rely on minimal insurance coverage that barely met her needs. Thomas's jaw tightened, anger simmering quietly beneath his forced calmness. He asked cautiously why no one had reported Greg's abusive tactics to upper management, and Anna responded with a bitter laugh that sent chills down his spine. "Who should we tell? Corporations don't care. They don't even know we exist, except as numbers." She paused, staring wearily into her coffee cup, admitting she felt powerless and vulnerable, terrified that speaking up could cost her the job she desperately needed to support her 2 young children since her husband passed away the previous year. Thomas felt his stomach twist with shame. The realization that a hard-working, dedicated employee saw herself as completely voiceless within his own organization was deeply unsettling. Anna continued quietly, revealing how each shift felt like a battle to simply survive, pushing through pain, enduring constant pressure, and staying quiet because speaking out had always brought retaliation rather than relief. Thomas could see the toll this environment had taken on her, the tired eyes, the weary slump of her shoulders, the defeated acceptance of mistreatment as a normal part of her job. He had initially expected to uncover inefficiencies or poor management techniques, but Anna's revelations painted a far more troubling picture. A systemic problem rooted in indifference, neglect, and exploitation. The whistle signaling the end of their short break interrupted the heavy silence. Anna pushed herself upright, the moment of vulnerability replaced again by her resilient determination. As she stood, Thomas promised himself silently that her quiet suffering would no longer go unnoticed or unresolved. He would personally ensure these voices were finally heard and real change would come swiftly. As the night wore on, the tension in the warehouse escalated, heightening Thomas's awareness of the oppressive working environment. Greg's presence loomed like a dark cloud, constantly pushing employees beyond reasonable limits. Thomas observed as Greg barked orders, his tone sharp and impatient, demanding faster performance from an already exhausted team. Anna, despite clearly struggling with increasing pain, maintained a determined pace, her jaw clenched with silent endurance. Nearby, Louis, the young warehouse assistant, dropped a box due to sheer fatigue, causing Greg to snap at him with humiliating remarks that echoed harshly through the warehouse. The older worker, Denise, visibly limped from the strain of repetitive heavy lifting, her face set in quiet determination as Greg coldly reprimanded her for moving too slowly. Thomas's blood boiled with anger each time Greg's callous words filled the air. He discreetly noted every harsh interaction, the evidence mounting with each passing hour. The atmosphere grew heavier, suffused with tension as workers hurried silently, their eyes fixed downward, clearly desperate to avoid Greg's wrath. At one point, Greg harshly confronted Louis, the young packer who had paused briefly, gasping from exertion. Thomas felt a surge of protective instinct but remained quiet, his fists clenching at his sides, painfully aware that he had to maintain his cover just a bit longer. A whispered conversation caught Thomas's attention as he passed Anna and Louis. Louis, visibly shaken and anxious after Greg's harsh words, murmured about his fear of losing his job, while Anna quietly assured him, "We just have to push through it. They don't hear us anyway." Her words were tinged with quiet despair, the defeated tone amplifying the injustice that Thomas was witnessing. The grim acceptance in her voice told him everything. Employees had learned silence was their only shield against retaliation. As the night wore on, Thomas realized he wasn't just watching inefficiencies or poor managerial practices. He was bearing witness to outright exploitation, rooted deeply within the warehouse's culture. The realization weighed heavily on him, amplifying his determination to confront and dismantle the toxic environment once and for all. By the shift's end, Thomas's resolve solidified into clear purpose. As employees quietly gathered their belongings, eyes hollowed by fatigue yet unwilling to voice their suffering, Thomas knew his undercover assignment had served its purpose. He had seen more than enough. It was time to shed his disguise and step back into his true role as CEO, not merely to implement new policies, but to restore the dignity and humanity that had been neglected for far too long. The following afternoon, Thomas returned to the warehouse, this time not as a quiet, invisible warehouse assistant, but as the CEO, sharply dressed in a tailored suit, carrying the weight of responsibility and determination. His unexpected arrival sent ripples through the building. Heads turned, whispered questions buzzed among employees, and the same workers who had barely noticed him before now stood frozen in astonishment. He walked directly to Greg's office, where he found the supervisor casually reclining at his desk, distractedly scrolling through his phone. Greg's casual expression quickly faded into stunned panic as he recognized Thomas, nearly knocking over his coffee in shock. Without offering Greg a chance to compose himself, Thomas calmly closed the door, his voice steady but firm as he addressed the stunned supervisor. "Let's talk about how you've been running this warehouse," Thomas began, his tone icy yet controlled. Greg attempted a feeble defense, claiming he had merely adhered to corporate guidelines, insisting that his harsh methods were necessary to maintain profitability. Thomas's response was swift and resolute, cutting sharply through Greg's excuses. He firmly challenged the supervisor, recounting in detail what he'd witnessed the previous night: employees pushed past exhaustion, arbitrary hour cuts, forced unpaid overtime, and Anna's painful struggle without adequate health care. Greg stammered excuses, trying to justify his actions as simply meeting corporate quotas, but Thomas interrupted sharply, slamming his hand down onto Greg's desk with a controlled yet powerful force that rattled Greg visibly. "Those are my guidelines," Thomas stated coldly, "and nowhere do they include exploiting or abusing employees for profit. You've misunderstood entirely what this company stands for." Greg's expression shifted from defensiveness to fear as Thomas rose decisively from his seat. "Effective immediately, you're terminated. Pack your belongings. Security will escort you out." Thomas didn't wait for Greg's reaction, already turning toward the door with resolute authority. Outside Greg's office, a small crowd of curious employees had gathered. Sensing something significant had occurred, Thomas approached Anna directly, meeting her confused but hopeful gaze with genuine sincerity. "Greg is no longer your supervisor," he said clearly, voice carrying through the gathering. A ripple of shocked relief passed through the employees. "No more arbitrary cuts, no more forced clockouts, and everyone eligible will have their benefits restored immediately." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Anna," he continued firmly, "I witnessed firsthand your dedication, resilience, and strength. I'd like you to step into Greg's position as the new supervisor. You understand the struggles faced by this team better than anyone, and you've earned their respect." Anna stared in disbelief, tears briefly filling her eyes before she quickly wiped them away, nodding with newfound determination. The warehouse filled with quiet murmurs of excitement and relief, as Thomas affirmed his commitment to lasting change, not just in this warehouse, but company-wide. Within just 1 week, the warehouse experienced a remarkable transformation. The oppressive atmosphere that had previously hung heavy over employees like a dark cloud began to lift, replaced by a palpable sense of optimism and renewed dignity. Anna smoothly transitioned into her new role as supervisor, her quiet confidence earning immediate respect among coworkers. She introduced fair scheduling practices that eliminated sudden hour cuts, clearly communicated expectations, and ensured every worker received proper breaks and fair overtime pay. The staff noticed these changes instantly, no longer working in fear of punishment or unpredictable cuts. Denise, who had once painfully struggled through her shifts, now moved with ease, supported by adjusted workloads that recognized her physical limitations. Louis and other younger workers regained their motivation, encouraged by management that genuinely valued their contributions. Thomas personally remained at the warehouse for several days, not just supervising but actively listening and adjusting policies based on direct feedback. Employees soon discovered their voices mattered, creating a newfound sense of trust between management and the workforce. Anna, who had previously believed no one at the executive level cared, was now deeply involved in decision-making processes, her insights guiding the implementation of realistic schedules, fair pay, and adequate health coverage. She frequently stopped to assist team members, offering compassionate support rather than harsh criticism. As Thomas observed her leadership, he felt immense pride, not just in Anna's growth, but in the genuine, human-focused culture he had begun to build. Workers now approached their tasks without fear, sharing jokes and brief conversations during their breaks instead of silently waiting for the next reprimand. The warehouse, once tense and rigid, gradually became a place filled with respectful collaboration and quiet laughter. Employees stayed a few minutes after their shifts, casually chatting about their day rather than rushing away, afraid of being penalized. This wasn't merely a shift in policy, it was a fundamental change in how employees perceived their workplace and themselves. Thomas realized this wasn't merely about correcting one manager's abuses. It was about cultivating a work environment grounded in empathy, fairness, and mutual respect. For the first time, he fully understood the profound impact that ethical leadership could have, far surpassing any profits or efficiency targets. His undercover experience had not only reshaped this warehouse, but redefined his understanding of true corporate success, prioritizing the well-being of the very people whose daily labor made ElectroNation thrive. 1 month later, Thomas returned unannounced to find a vibrant warehouse humming efficiently yet calmly under Anna's thoughtful leadership. The once tense space was now filled with purposeful energy and occasional bursts of laughter, a stark contrast from the harsh silence he'd first encountered. Employees like Louis and Denise worked diligently but comfortably, benefiting from transparent scheduling, fair pay, and restored health benefits. Anna, who had initially been hesitant about her promotion, had flourished, her natural empathy and firm but kind leadership style gaining genuine respect from the entire staff. Thomas observed with satisfaction as Anna handled interactions effortlessly, seamlessly resolving minor issues and offering encouragement to employees who now clearly trusted her authority. She confided to Thomas how strange yet rewarding it felt to finally lead a team that knew their voices mattered. Inspired by Anna's progress and the clear morale boost among employees, Thomas committed to replicating this transformation across all his warehouses. He insisted that regional managers regularly participate in ground-level work, ensuring leadership understood employee challenges firsthand. Anna smiled knowingly when Thomas shared this plan, remarking playfully, "You're about to shake things up everywhere," to which he replied warmly, "Exactly. That's exactly the point." The profound shift wasn't merely about fixing a troubled location. It marked the beginning of a company-wide culture shift, one rooted in compassion, fairness, and true respect for those whose hard work made success possible. The story powerfully illustrates that genuine leadership isn't measured solely by profits or business growth, but by empathy, fairness, and understanding employees' experiences firsthand. Thomas Bennett learned a crucial lesson. True leadership requires actively stepping outside the comfort of executive offices and witnessing the realities faced by workers on the ground. Reports and figures can easily mask human struggles, but direct experience reveals the true challenges employees endure daily. By personally experiencing the tough working conditions, exploitation, and injustices faced by staff, Thomas realized that policies and directives mean nothing without compassionate enforcement. His undercover experience was transformative, teaching him the necessity of creating a culture where employees feel valued, respected, and heard. He discovered the importance of bridging the gap between executive-level decision-making and frontline realities, ensuring that leadership decisions reflect empathy rather than detached corporate metrics. Ultimately, the story underscores a fundamental truth. The strength and success of any organization depend profoundly on the dignity and well-being of the people who sustain it. True success is built not just on impressive financial statements, but on fostering environments where everyone is treated fairly and given the opportunity to thrive.